All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Locascio. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am excited to present on Sound and Color, which was my special project to reach out and use music therapy to serve LGBTQIA plus population. So I'm going to go ahead and kick that off. This was the very first image that we used to advertise the group when we started, so I thought it'd be a cute way to start the presentation as well. All right, so I want to give a little bit of background between LGBT plus individuals and then mental health. So approximately 9 million US adults identify themselves as just lesbian or gay, and that's not considering the bisexual, transsexual, queer, all the other facets of culture. 19 million Americans report engaging in same-sexual behavior, and 25.6 million acknowledge at least some same-sex attraction. When we look at different areas in the United States where queer people are higher populated and more dense, we can find that many of those areas are farther on the West Coast or more towards the East Coast, which coincidentally is also where most major cities are. So that is often to escape more rural areas where there's often more conservative mindsets. And that was one of the encouraging parts about doing this project, was that with a higher population, there is a higher amount of need in those areas. So that's why I decided San Diego, that's the place, let's do it. All right. So there's some more background behind mental health and the LGBT plus community. The LGBT plus community is 2.5 times more likely to experience depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. As I've said kind of earlier in different discussions, there's multifaceted reasons for this. Oftentimes it comes to lacks of support that are often found within heteronormative and cisnormative cultures. So those LGBT individuals are often turned to outside resources, such as people that they meet who are also LGBT outside of their home environments. And approximately 1/3 of transgender people have attempted suicide. This is one of the big focuses for my project as well, is that I really wanted to focus on these LGBT individuals because there is such a lack of support, and as a result, mental health isn't addressed as much. And then lastly, suicide attempts is 4 times greater for LGBT plus youth and 2 times greater for questioning. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the healthcare system, social support, bisexuality, and then federal laws. So one of the biggest things I want to talk about within the healthcare system is that there's currently and always has been a certain era of discrimination and stigma. This occurs when it comes to access to health services, leading some individuals to delay their necessary healthcare, and sometimes forgo it altogether. As we've seen within the past month, back in June 2020, we've had individuals who identify as trans federally. Hospitals are allowed to deny them services, especially if there is a religious affiliation. All right, and then when it comes to social support as well, as I said, there's less access to social support. Queer people have to worry about potential rejection from family, especially if they live in those areas that are more conservative, as you saw within the Midwest or within the northern part of the United States. And then when you think about bisexual people, and specifically, we have to bring into account rejection from both the queer community and the hetero community. So those individuals are also facing a multitude of difficulties as well, and oftentimes within the queer community are not accepted or have been labeled as kind of a phase before you ultimately come out as gay or as lesbian. All right, and until this past month, for federal laws, non-discrimination policies for firing individuals were not federally enforced. So that was back in June 2020. So there's a lot of forces federally that are kind of against each other. We have progress, and then there's always backlash. And that seems to be the pattern with most minority groups, but especially with the queer community as well. As we continue, I just want to stress this again. I am always a big advocate. We don't treat LGBT people plus people for being LGBT plus. We focus on the areas and the results towards their mental health that may be affected, or towards their what they turn to. So sometimes that can show up in terms of substance abuse, or it can turn up in homelessness and how that's affected their mental health and behavioral states. Okay. All right, so what was my plan? Let's go into sound and color. So the very first thing I thought was, I'm gonna have to reach out to the San Diego LGBT Community Center, because that is the biggest and most established organization in San Diego. I wanna propose a program, I wanna facilitate sessions, bonus points if we get a contract out of the end of it. That was the original plan before anything. And then I started to reach out. So I reached out to them, and then I reached out to various older adult centers that specifically serve LGBT plus populations, as well as youth services. And luckily, the LGBT Center of San Diego did respond. But I found those contacts by going to the website, seeing the staff, who's in charge of behavioral health services, and then establishing and requesting a date to meet. So like I said, the LGBT Center did accept that. And then that's how I found Steve, who's the head of behavioral services there. And then Sarah is his manager. So I've been in contact with both of them. And we established our Friday meetings. And I began to prepare a packet to pitch this program. And so it began. So I had several parts of the packet. There was the meeting agenda, research on music therapy, and established in mental health and crisis and trauma. Whenever you do any type of program proposal, look under the specific areas that you want to work with. So if you're in medical, find the research on medical and music therapy. And a bonus tip is if you throw in how it's going to save them money, because that's what every business wants to know. And then I listed the goals and the program outline so that they can kind of get an idea of what it looks like, because many of them did not know what music therapy was yet, which is why the Weeks at a Glance was so unique. You're probably like, that's great. I see all these words. What does this look like? Boom. There you go. So here is the different facets that I was talking about. Our meeting agenda is on the left. I wanted to establish time to build rapport and talk with Steve and see why he was at the center and what made him passionate about that, so that I have an understanding of their mission statements, of their values, but then also I could turn that around in a strategic business way to incorporate those into my pitch. All right, and then on the right is some of those resources. I gathered them from various research articles, but as well, if you go onto the musictherapy.org website and you go under populations, you can often find an already made list of cited material or how music therapy can be used to treat mental health, crisis and trauma, intellectual disabilities, you name it, it's probably there. So those are the first 2 pages. The second 2 looked a little bit like this. So I gave a little sample size in the top left there. I think that zoomed in, talking about gay men, lesbian women, and transgender individuals. Not as much research is currently on non-binary individuals. So if you're wondering why that wasn't in there, there you go. And then for pansexual and bisexual people, there's also a lack of research. So after all this research that I did, I was like, what are our goals going to be? And this took a lot of discussion between me and Rachel and then me and Ariana. And I kept running from person to person and seeking out additional mentors to see what they thought. So the very first one was identification of coping skills, improving positive socialization to kind of counteract that isolation that occurs within the queer community, identification of resources, and improved perceived connection to the community. And then my program outline came out of that. So this was a 12-week program. Here are the 10 weeks of sessions with 2 weeks at the beginning for assessment. At least that's what I thought it was. And then things changed. And on the right, you can see just a really brief explanation that I provided for the individuals I was pitching to, kind of what the interventions would look like. All right, so the plan, after talking to Steve, he was like, I love this. This is a great plan. Let's go ahead and move forward. So we ultimately decided to have an all genders group of 22 plus. They often differentiate ages 0 to 21 as the youth services and 22 plus as the adult services. And they typically don't mix those because it's easier to approach them differently. We'll just say it like that. So we decided to work on the goals that I had discussed. He was okay with those, and those aligned with their business goals. And then we would start virtual and then transition to in person. So I began doing the next part of the project, which was not even expected, and that is our marketing. Whew, this was a journey. So I had to figure a way that would tell people at the center what music therapy was in a way that would catch their eye. So I definitely wanted to make sure to show different aspects. So I talked about crisis and trauma. Let's do short bullet points in each category. Healthy coping, mental health, so that individuals who are at the center could see that poster in passing, look at one category, find the three things, have an idea of what it looks like. And I tended to use imagery that depicts same-sex couples, non-binary individuals, and had trans representation. And then at the bottom, I had sound and color and kind of explained what we were all about, with the contact information below. Something that I really care about in marketing, and I want to shout out to all of you, is if you're thinking about proposing any type of partnership, go ahead and find their logo with a transparent background on their website. Go ahead and throw it in. It looks really put together, and it already shows a visual for the partnership between your organizations, so that they don't have to imagine what it looks like. You're showing them. And then here's our actual poster that we went ahead and sent out to individuals. Yes. All right. And then COVID hit, bum, bum, bum. And this was a crazy time because originally we were going to do all in-person sessions, and then boom, we're starting virtual. And then we're going to transition into in-person. Of course, we did not transition to in-person, so you can only imagine the implications. Let's see what that looks like. So we had a little bit of a plan change. Our sessions got pushed by 3 weeks off schedule because individuals were learning how to cope and transition to virtual formats. It was harder to retain and get people to sign up. So we had to completely change the way we were going to reach out. Originally, we were going to use just the center in San Diego, queer people. We ended up going nationally to all these different resources. I had the Human Rights Campaign of California reposting things for me. I had individual LGBT groups on Facebook, but ultimately I ended up posting in the queer supporting music therapy group, and that is where the tables turned. We ended up getting 3 individuals, and all of them identified as LGBT, but also as music therapists, which I found out the very first day of facilitation. Yeah. So you can imagine the stress, the passion. I had to do promotional adjustments as well and add the other organizations that I said, new population, adjusted weeks. We ended up pushing all the way into July here, and we went fully virtual. So I wanted to throw in the bonus things that I didn't anticipate with the project. That was the staff support sessions that I did for the center, so that the staff could see what music therapy looked like, and then they could see whether they think it would be applicable for the groups they work with. Staff education, showing them how they can use music, really utilizing those resources to show them that we are a vital form of sessions that they could utilize. And then extra advertising, and additionally support for the Music Works staff as well in education, as you all saw this morning. All right, so what interventions did we use? That's the fun question. We used a variety of receptive and active music making methods. So we had songwriting, we had hand drumming, we used garage band looping and layering. One of my favorite interventions that I want to note was based off the I Weigh campaign, where individuals identified themselves and weighed themselves on values that they hold as opposed to their weight. So that was with our body positivity session. And it also combined media. We did guided relaxations that were longer than typical. So we did ones that were 30 minutes, 45 minutes to really test the individual reflections of oneself. We did breathing techniques, connection to resources, free movement, all of it's in there. And of course, COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter movement did have their own implications. Intersectionality between both of those were represented in our group. One of the individuals had to cease services because they had contracted COVID-19. And another member also identified within the Black community. So we had discussions within the individual dynamics of the whiteness and Blackness of the group how we can be better and how that looks and how we are advocating. We had a session on love where we described the different types of love that we have, and those things holding us back that we can't control. So people's views of us, judgment, imposter syndrome within music therapy, and then just talking about who those support systems are. So we gain them that way. We use the annotation feature on Zoom to do songwriting. And this way, the individual clients get validation not only from hearing each other, but then they can see all their ideas together on screen. And the benefit of that is then they can make those visual connections as well as oral and audio connections. And we started it off too with a good old "Who am I?" To really acknowledge the fact that you don't have to be your queer identity. If you want to embrace that as a major facet, you fully and freely can. But there is so much more to a person than just their gender and sexuality. Okay, and then topics that arose from all these discussions. We had family acceptance, intersectionality, learning about self-love, music for work versus self. That was a huge one within music therapy populations. Before we began this process, most of the individuals no longer participated in self-care and music, and were feeling fairly burnt out. They had only used music within sessions. So by the end of it, all of the individuals ended up saying that they had either began learning new songs or writing music or participating in those. So to really distinguish those two is going to help with their longevity in their career, which was an unexpected outcome, or rather unintended original outcome. And then music therapy and job limitations with acceptance, talking about how queer individuals are misgendered all the time within their music therapy practices, how music therapy is often ran currently by white cis straight women around their 40s, probably right now, for private practices, etc., and how there's a learning curve there. And then isolation. COVID-19, as if there wasn't already difficulties with connecting to a community, now you have to find those communities virtually. And for those who don't have access to computers and electronics, that's a lot more difficult. All right, so big things I learned from this project. There's a lot of intersectionality in the queer community. I already knew that, but in the context of the session, I learned more about it than I could have ever imagined. We had individuals who identified having to weigh their race against their sexuality and gender. And that's something that as a white cis male, I hadn't had to think about before, especially as it applied to other individuals. So I had one discussion with a mentor that discussed having to negotiate their Blackness with their queerness and how oftentimes they saw themselves as queer and that's what they were worried about. But the rest of the world saw them as Black, and they had to really negotiate which one of those identities to claim. And we saw that within a various amount of cultures and representation. I learned a lot about my own internal bias as well. As you lead people and facilitate groups, you realize where your misunderstandings might have been, such as what I was describing, as well as the non-binary experience. I hadn't met an individual who identified as non-binary prior to this. I would say I was well-versed in research and in videos, but in person is going to be completely different, and no individual is the same, so you're not going to get that from a research article. And just say it, if you're having difficulty, for instance, I had some hesitation when approaching the Black Lives Matter movement because I didn't know how to go about that conversation. But the facilitation would have gone a lot more smoothly if I would have just said, hey, the Black Lives Matter movement's going on. There's a lot of police brutality, but there's also, a lot of aggravation on both sides. Let's talk about that. So just getting out there. And if you mess up, you can always correct yourself and move on. And then music therapy in the queer community and what that looks like. And then verbal processing and counseling. Those were giant skills that I learned from this. Huge ones that many music therapists don't have to, I'm not gonna say don't have to learn. Many music therapists don't have the opportunity to learn in undergrad, especially in internship. And if you aren't working in behavioral health, it is not as common. And yeah, I wanted to give a special thanks page to my oh so amazing supports throughout this entire process. We have Mandy, who plugged me with my mentors, which was Freddie, and he's amazing, and I appreciate him, and who's continued this project. We have Rachel, who literally sat in on so many individual meetings with me and probably had to clear her entire schedule, and I appreciate that. and all the guidance that went along with it. And then we have Ariana, my heart, my soul, my co-intern, who coached me in so many ways on the queer community and her experiences and how I could utilize those in my session. And just an awesome data collector, an awesome team member, and just an emotional support. And yeah, I am free to answer any of your questions. Thanks.
Yay, good presentation. I have a question, and I've been thinking about this a lot. What do you think are like, I want to go more like positive. What do you think like really happened and was good with it being only music therapist as the population?
Absolutely. I think the idea behind how I used music within the sessions could be even more intentional, and we could go further with everything because they already had those experiences. We didn't have to teach how to use instruments or discuss what the connotations of music were. They already knew the background behind the song, so we could really elaborate on that. And because of that, since they decided to go into a field of music, they were much more willing to invest in discussing what music was important to them as well. Fabulous.
Yeah, I have a question, Brian. So for let's say a music therapist sees a need in their community to serve specifically the LGBTQ plus population, but identify as an ally and maybe not within the LGBTQ community. So what are some considerations for that music therapist to how to approach that without kind of I don't know how to say like overstepping, but also being like using their therapeutic skills to serve a need in the community, which is what we do in many different populations.
Absolutely. First of all, fantastic question. I'm really glad that you asked that. I think one of the biggest things to remember is that music therapists work with populations that they often don't identify with. And it really comes down to education. You're not going to go into an intersectionality, race-based space without doing your research. So to take those opportunities, you can go through articles, you can read the music therapy specific research that goes into the queer population. But I encourage everyone, as I always have within music therapy or anything, to utilize resources that are outside of your practice, because you'll find a lot of queer resources outside of there. I would encourage these individuals also to find mentors who do identify as queer. And if they can find mentors who identify as queer and music therapists, that would be ideal, because there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to lead the sessions, but they should be aware of the different topics that may come up. And when they start leading sessions, yes, come into that space open. For instance, hi, I'm Brian. I am a straight white cis male, and honestly, I don't know about your experiences, but I'm here to listen, and I'm here to facilitate your discussion of your experiences, and just to put it out there, and then go from there. Additional questions?
Question in the chat, Brian. Oh, sorry, Mandy.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Can you just share with the group what the outcomes of your project are, like after the project ended, and kind of what that resulting in?
Yes, so we do have continued, we have potential for continued services. Currently, the staff and everyone that I've talked with has really enjoyed our sessions. And so we are currently working on expanding to the older adult population for specifically just LGBT plus individuals, which is like awesome and like the best, because those populations are the one who had to grow up with the most difficulty and with the least amount of resources and acceptance. So that's currently where we're headed. In addition, the center is looking at grants that they have, and I think we're looking at grants that we can get. So that partnership's really starting to interweave in itself, and they've expressed continued interest. Thanks. Thank you for that question. thank you. I appreciate that. Also did her, oh, okay, special project with older adults. Yeah, I heard about that. And I think I talked with them. I can't remember their name. Was it Leaf, if I was gonna guess, or no?
Emily.
Emily? Okay. Yeah, so it's an area that's been touched on, but within San Diego specifically, actual services with that population is an unaccessed music therapy area, which is why I think I'm so passionate about it and why I want it to really thrive. Do we have any additional questions or questions about program development, anything like that? Okay. Well, thank you for taking the time. And yeah, let's go ahead and end it.